to go do the research and keep finding out more things for yourself. So Mike Flynn may be charged with violating. I saw these words in the news, and James, you and I, and probably lots of other people tweeting it basically at the same time when we heard the Logan Act. Suddenly, people interested in enforcing the Logan Act, essentially prohibiting private citizens from negotiating with foreign governments in disputes with the United States. The Logan Act background story is actually a really interesting one, and we'll include links to that as well. It goes back to 1798, where a private citizen from Philadelphia, Dr. George Logan, went to France to try and smooth over some of the revolution actions that were interfering with the U.S. James, this story, as we've talked about, everything's kind of topsy-turvy. A lot of people who have been active the last 8 years are all kind of going down in their hidey hole, and the people who have been asleep for 8 years are very wide awake and very agitated, even just kind of talking with a neighbor and just, talking cats and stuff. He wanted to talk about, did you see this? Did you see this guy? People are pretty amped up, dude. What's your take on the Flynn situation?
Well, everyone's amped up, and both people on both sides of the spectrum are looking at the wrong issues and thinking of it in the wrong way. It's interesting, as you point out, yourself and myself, and I'm sure many other people in the alt media are seeing Logan Act and alarm bells ring, because the other side of that is, of course, Bilderberg and groups like that are themselves a violation of the Logan Act, and every U.S. private citizen that goes there to negotiate with the foreign leaders of governments that are there at Bilderberg every year are in violation of the Logan Act. The other part of the Logan Act lore that we should bring up is the fact that it was signed into law in 1799 by President Adams. It has only ever been used to charge one person ever, and it has never been used to successfully prosecute anyone ever in the couple hundred year history of the Logan Act now, because it's pretty much unprosecutable at this point. It's a clear abrogation of First Amendment rights. If you look at the person who was actually charged under it, some Pennsylvania farmer or something, it was because he wrote an op-ed basically just saying that he thought that the Louisiana Purchase should be given back to France or whatever. I mean, it was ridiculous and unprosecutable. It's a stupid law, but the point is, Bilderberg is on its face a violation of the Logan Act. All the U.S. citizens attending Bilderberg every year are in violation of it. It's never brought up. It's never been a political issue. No one cares about the Logan Act until there's a political, brouhaha that can be used to their advantage about it. Flynn won't be prosecuted under it, precisely because A, it's unprosecutable, and B, they don't want to set that precedent. They just want to throw it out there and get people kind of acquainted with it and kind of give the insinuation that there was some sort of breach of law going on here, and then, it'll be swept under the rug. But of course it will be etched in people's minds, like your neighbor and other people who kind of just tune into the news just enough to get whatever their political flavor of news is. Again, there were so many incredibly important issues going on here, including, as you point out, where did these transcripts of the phone calls come from? Of course, from the NSA. And I'll throw a link into an article I was reading earlier this morning about how one of the congressmen who's just outraged that they were recording Flynn's phone calls and listening in was one of the congressmen who was all for the NSA's ability to record and monitor all U.S. Anyone's phone calls, right? It's all fine, except until it's one of the people in the government. Who would have ever thought, except the people who have been pointing out, like myself and yourself and others for years, this is the power. This is the real power in government. It isn't the elected officials that you tick a box for. It's the people who are listening in on their phone calls and transcribing everything they're doing. And the people with that access to that power have the blackmail power over the ostensible government. So this story touches on so many important things, none of which are going to be covered. It's all going to be about, it's Trump and Russia and all of this, and they're going to spin it away from the really important bedrock issues here. And no surprise there is the craziness just ratchets up and people just get swept away with it.
And there's a lot to get kind of swept away. James, you and I were kind of joking off mic beforehand. Our friend Morgan Lesko, I remember just after the election, kind of created a graphic and had a tweet playing on, you've seen the airplane things where it says, put your own oxygen mask on first before you try and administer help to anyone else. Morgan basically said, hey, everybody calm down. Make sure you adjust your own kind of personal, emotional, spiritual self before you go out and try and help all kinds of other people. So I think that's some pretty good advice on this New World Next Week episode number 298 for February 16th, 2017. Our second story this week, I think, is another one that we can look at as blowing up in our faces. A never-happened-before event. As the Oroville Dam drains, a problem remains. You may have heard about massive possible breach of a dam in California. 200,000 people were evacuated at some point. Now, I think that order has been lifted, and the immediate, fears have kind of subsided. But the background on this, and then I'll kind of extrapolate why I think this is important. The Mercury News reports that more than a decade ago, federal and state officials and some of California's largest water agencies rejected concerns that the massive earthen spillway at the Oroville Dam, at risk of collapse and prompting evacuations, could erode during heavy winter rains and cause a catastrophe. People warned about this 12 years ago, James. So I don't know if you have any comments on this story, if you've seen it kind of play out overseas or not, if you have any comments on this.
No, in fact, as the Canadian in Japan, I'm going to pull my Canadian in Japan card. I haven't even heard of the Oroville Dam before you sent me the link to this story, so you'll have to fill me in on this and what it says about America's crumbling infrastructure in general.
Honestly, I hadn't heard of it by name either until, the story really started. I think why I wanted to kind of talk about this, I think just like our dams bursting and our bridges collapsing, which we see happening more and more frequently, and everything else, we wait for it to blow up in our faces. That was one of my earliest kind of political, social realizations growing up as a kid in America. I was like, oh, we're just really into prevention. We just wait till something blows up in our face, and then we throw all kinds of money and all kinds of resources at it once it's essentially too late, or too late to do anything really effective. I'm kind of dealing with this right now. Real talk time. I let my health and exercise slide all last year while I rebuilt Media Monarchy after being in the commercial radio stations. So now, kind of in the cold of winter here, and we had the worst winter, the most snow we've ever had here in probably about 37 years here in Oregon. Also, along with some family emergencies I'm dealing with, and you can get more on that story on my daily broadcasts if I've been talking about it on the Morning Monarchy, and even the Pump Up the Volume DJ set as well. I realized again that you have to work on these things ahead of time, all the time. It's the ounce of prevention cliche. So I basically spent a year not exercising, enjoying recreational cannabis here in Oregon, and then when it's time to go cook in the kitchen, crack open some beers. And then winter hit, and then family emergencies hit, and you realize, oh, I'm not going to fix problems I let slide over the course of a year with one rigorous weekend of running and juicing. It's not going to happen. So I find this story really interesting. And again, I think adding the personal to these stories that we see gets at, again, what you and I were talking about just off mic. Your latest video about the weird Japanese festival resonates really well, and I think it's resonating with people. That as we see all of this ratcheting up, and just trying to not wig out about everything, these are crazy times. Things are pretty topsy-turvy, James. Any thoughts on that before we move on to our third and final segment?
Just that you bring up such an important point. We talk about the body politic